Thank you. Okay, great. How's everybody doing so far? Doing pretty good? Okay, cool. Tight. My name is Jessica Bellamy, just like Michelle said. She's amazing. Can we just give a clap for her really quick? Because she's always organizing events like this, and she's just a very intentional person. But yes, so my name is Jessica Bellamy, and I'm an information designer. I have a small agency called GRIDS, the Grassroots Information Design Studio. It's based in Louisville, Kentucky. I've had it for almost 6 years now, and it creates infographics in partnership with nonprofits and community groups. It has a very inclusive strategic business plan so that I can accommodate a lot of different organizations' needs. I also am an alum of the Adobe Creative Residency Program, which is a program through Adobe Systems. I mean, everybody who's ever downloaded a PDF has opened Adobe Acrobat or something like that. That's Adobe. I like to give that clarification. I did see InDesign on one of the slides just a minute ago about Geosystems. But yes, the residency is just where they choose a handful of creatives and they they give them the resources to pursue a passion project. I was one of 6 people chosen my year. Only 4 from the United States and 2 from Germany were chosen. So I like to say that because that's a pretty big deal, I think. Yeah, it's important. Thank you. I also am a co-founder and co-principal investigator of the Root Cause Research Center. How many hats does this girl wear? Too many, promise you. The Root Cause Research Center is newer. It's a nonprofit that is grassroots led and that trains community folks so they can be able to investigate the issues that are most important to them involving involving health disparities in their area. We're focused on the American South, so of course we're launching projects right now in Louisville, Kentucky, and we're hoping to touch some other spaces inevitably, but our whole goal is about unearthing that whole story, because a lot of times we find data that's just about the symptoms and not enough about the conditions that led to that affliction, and so that's why we decided to start that nonprofit. So, as you can already tell, I wear a lot of hats like many of you in this room. I am a research analyst. Initially in my career, I worked at the Neurodevelopmental Science Lab at U of L. In the beginning of my career, I got trained in community organizing from the Network Center of Community Change, and I learned a lot from canvassing and being a part of Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, and I inevitably brought my data, social justice, and design side all together to form GRIDS, just kind of giving you a background of where I came from. But it all really started in a neighborhood called Smoketown. How many people have heard of Smoketown? Got a lot of hands, cool. Smoketown is in Louisville, Kentucky. It's the oldest historically black neighborhood in our city. It was one of the few places African Americans were allowed to live after the Civil War. It's actually the neighborhood where I'm from. Here's a picture of my grandmother. Hi, Nana. She owns a restaurant called Shirley Mae's Cafe, which is in Smoketown, and my family, if you ever go there, you're gonna meet everyone in my family. You're also gonna meet my mom, my uncles, my aunts. You'll meet everybody, the whole fam. So Smoketown is definitely a neighborhood that hasn't been afforded a lot of the entitlements that other neighborhoods have in our city. And so it's definitely a community that may be devastated by urban decay and things of that nature, but that has a very strong core. And with the effects of Hope 6, our public housing, which you can kind of see in the background, Shepherd Square, Old Shepherd Square, that public housing was torn down to make way for mixed income apartments under the Hope 6 initiative from the Obama administration. But when that happened, of course, there was a lot of interest from developers in our city looking to expand the urban core. So I got together with Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, which was an organization I was already a part of. That's me. And we decided to go around Smoketown to we had this 55-question survey, and we wanted to get at some of those priorities and concerns of residents that were already there. Because a lot of the common opinion was, oh, now we had this mass exodus of folks, so now we can kind of do whatever we want with this property. No, there were still lots of residents in Smoketown. So when we did this survey, we realized we didn't want it just to sit on a shelf. So I offered to do infographics. I had 1 weekend to do it, so a lot of coffee and a lot of Monster. I'm pretty sure I have heart conditions. But I was able to do some infographics infographics for this report. And when we released it, which this was years ago, this is before I started GRIDS, okay? I'm still working as a research analyst, but when we released this report, some interesting things happened. We knew we wanted to put it in the hands of policymakers, we wanted to put it in the hands of developers, but we also, of course, put it in the hands of the residents that were part of the work, and even residents that were just curious that maybe didn't do the survey. You can still have it, of course. And what ended up happening was there was a power shift. Community forums were no longer dominated by the no's of the local council member. It was now a place where now residents were armed with data about their neighborhood, about the assets that could use more resources, about the priority concerns of their fellow person that's living right next to them. And so the conversation completely shifted to where we now had a body of folks that were able to advocate for their own needs and from a platform they didn't have before, because now they had data at their fingertips. Well, that made me super excited. I felt like I was a weapon maker standing on top of a mountain, and I wanted to make more swords and shields, all that sort of thing. And so I saved my pennies and I created GRIDS almost 6 years ago today. So that's how I got started. The whole foundation of why I do the work that I do today is about creating access to information, because people that are most impacted by issues are really the best advocates for them, and they're the ones who should shape the narrative about how their story is told. So the work I do today is still very grounded in community work. I work with a lot of community leaders. I do a lot of visioning work too for future initiatives. I just haven't left the community space. I've had the privilege of working with a lot of different organizations in a lot of different capacities. But there's a lot of things that I put into my work before I even touch my computer, which for anyone who's ever been to one of my workshops, you already know that, right? It's a long workshop, and we don't even talk about design for a hot darn minute. So first thing I want to do is give you the definition of equity that I live by, okay? So how many people have heard of the term equity? Okay, great. I was hoping that it was the majority of the room because this is a health conference around data. So, you hope. Anyway, so equity. How many people have seen this illustration? A lot of folks. So this is the most common illustration used to talk about the equity in relation to equality. And it's used by teachers, it's used by healthcare providers, it's used by all sorts of different folks. But actually there are some problems with this illustration that reinforce some power dynamics that are very destructive. A year ago, I stumbled across an article by this one person with this pen name that I love so much, Sippin' the Inequity, wrote a wonderful blog post about why that illustration needs to be revised. And so I wanted to walk you through it because when I first shared it, there was some kind of opposition from some folks. Some people got what the article was saying, but other folks needed a little bit more information. So that's what we're gonna do. What's wrong with this illustration? It's beautiful. Well, let's get to that point. So we all know the narrative. It's where, or most of us know the narrative, it's where you have these 3 children who love baseball. They love it. It's their favorite game ever. But of course, being children and child labor laws being as they are today, they can't afford to buy tickets to the baseball game, right? So they have this barrier, a fence, an impediment to getting to their goal. Well, we can get a resource. If we take that resource, everybody gets the same amount, then maybe that could be a solution. But of course, that's the equality solution. You have the first kid who was already tall enough to see over the fence. Now he's standing way over the fence and he can see to the snack stand and see the people in the crowd. You have the second kid where 1 box is just right, and now you have the third kid who 1 box is just not enough. So of course, the illustration says, well, if it's equity, then we'd reallocate our resources to where the most need is. Okay, where's the problem, Jessica? Right here. So what Sippin' the Inequity was trying to get at in their article is when we make the children different heights, we're actually operating under a system of white supremacy. Because we're saying that this child who's the shortest is inherently needy. There is something broken about this child. There's something that needs to be, that doesn't allow them to reach their full success. They are incapable of getting to their full potential because it is an inherent brokenness that is a part of who they are. That's messed up. It's messed up. And that's what Sippin' the Inequity was trying to get at. So what can we do? So when I redesigned this graphic, I only worked with 2 children. I didn't really need a third. But in my idea, what does that mean when we're making the two children the same height? And I looked back on my training as a community organizer. So from the Network Center for Community Change, everything is grounded into the fact that everyone is creative, resourceful, and whole. So let's say that. I am. Say the I am part too.
I am creative, resourceful, and whole.
I am.
Creative, resourceful, and whole.
Everyone you encounter, even if you're having a bad day yourself, you are always creative, resourceful, and whole. And when you build that into your work, you're able to create a collaboratory space of shared power, of mutual understanding, of respect, and where dignity is shared. Because even if someone's not bringing a technical skill to the table, that doesn't mean the expertise of their lived experience isn't as valid and as credible as what you have and what you bring to the table. So this is what was missing from that original illustration. So when we take the same scenario where we have two kids, both still love baseball, when we keep the problem, or we still have the barrier of the fence, when we keep the problem in the system, this is what it looks like. This is what Sipping the Inequity was talking about. There's nothing wrong with the individuals. The individuals are not in crisis. It is the situation itself that is in crisis. And that's when we can get to the more targeted solutions that are most important to try to address in our work. So this is equity. Does that make sense? Cool, 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 tight, tight, tight. So what is equity, Jessica? It's about creating an opportunity for all to reach their full potential by addressing systemic oppression. Well, how do you do that? Funny story. You do that by being, one, considerate, which means evaluating and analyzing your work recursively. You do that by being cooperative. Anyone who enters the space gets that dignity, that respect, and becomes a subject matter expert of their own skill sets, making sure you're working that way. It's about being inclusive, because half the time when we ask who's missing from the table, it's a lot of folks. It's about being accountable, which means taking responsibility for what you make and how it affects the world, and not just the micro context of your county or city, whomever you're creating the data for, but the macro conversation at large. Is it reinforcing stigmas? Is it reinforcing stereotypes? I'll talk some more about that in a second. And also being flexible, because we can't always have the foresight to do no harm, but we can have the integrity and the agility to do better. Does that make sense? Cool. Always need an amen chorus. Okay. So I like to reference this little section of a piece that I wrote earlier this year called Weaponizing Truth. Just like I was talking about before, that macro context is what I'm most concerned with when I'm doing work, mainly because a lot of the things that we create between the language that we use, the jargon, the visuals that we decide to use, the colors that we use, even when we're illustrating our graphics to show impact. Sometimes that's reinforcing stigmas, stereotypes, and other systems of oppression, and we don't even intend to do that. So if you have questions about that, I can definitely dive in more, but I only have 20 minutes, and who knows what my time is. So I'm doing my best. I also like to reference Natasha Iskander, who is a professor out of NYU Wagner. She talks about how we as an individual have a very rigid and limited ability to see solutions, so we have to collaborate in order to see the full range of possibilities, and that no individual is above bias, political pressures, or their own personal deficiencies in perception. So it's important to continue to work with community in whatever we do. So now I can show you all the pretty stuff I make. I always have to start that way. All right. So I make different things. Sometimes it's posters like this one that talks about the correlation between sex education and the gender gap. And this is another example of a poster that was specifically for an Adobe office, because they just created a report that had to do with the diversity disconnect. And I was like, well, you guys need to look at it too. So here are some examples of some other paper reports I've done. This one was done with the Office of Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods, illustrating work. I've also done projects like this. I saw earlier there was some references to PrEP projects. The reason why we chose this aesthetic visual was because we wanted the conversation around HIV and PrEP to be one around resilience, rather than just the continuing the stigma that HIV is a death sentence and so forth and so on. So. I also do digital reports, of course, things that are just meant for your computer. These are examples from the National Coalition on School Diversity. I do their research and policy briefs, so that if folks don't have time to read the whole document, then there's one-page explainers that also exist in there that can be easily printed. Here's another example of a non-traditional report that is 14 one-page explainers. And because of this work, which I did again with Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, we were able to get an ordinance passed. We were able to inspire a lot of conversation around participatory budgeting because we took the 300 some odd page document that is Louisville Metro's budget, and we're able to find more digestible ways to have conversations and help people see their place in that work. Now there's a position that was created at the Center for Health Equity around participatory budgeting, and there were a couple of council members that started small participatory budget projects. So this did a lot of impact over the course of since 2017. And it's still, I think, reverberating. I also do a lot of one-page explainers. They're very narrative-led, but things that are meant to be put in people's hands, presentation materials. I've even done medical illustrations, and I do a lot of web infographics. Here's some slides from one long web infographic I did a couple years ago in collaboration with organizations that worked with folks that were affected by incarceration, parents that were formerly incarcerated, and adults whose parents were formerly or currently incarcerated. And this piece is actually on display right now at California Polytechnic State University, just to show case studies of how graphic design can be worked with in community. This is just one of, I think, 12 pieces in that space. But of course, I do motion infographics. Oop, I meant to mute the music. You don't need to hear music. But these are different materials that you can definitely see easily on my website. And the reason why I started using more motion is because I think it translates stories easier and it allows more entertainment around galvanizing people's interest around data. Because right now you're looking at this math equation and you're like, why am I looking at math equation? But it also looks beautiful. Well, it's really to reference ethnomathematics and to draw you into a couple of different articles and pieces I did in the past. And it also gives me the opportunity to explain really complex topics in a more narrative-led sort of way when I use visuals. Yeah, I'll let this play for half a second so you can see. This was about the Black aesthetic and how double consciousness affects the way that we create as Black people in America, in the context of America. And of course, I'm a Star Trek fan, so of course I have to do some fun stuff for me. But still, connected back to the work. There's a lot of different pieces that I've done over the course of my career that I feel really proud of, and I've been very lucky to share that with lots of different organizations, not only across the country, but in Canada and in Germany. And from all these conversations with other folks and talking about the way that I approach design, now I've created a curriculum, essentially. I have this great workshop called the Graphic Ally Hackathon. There is one more free one this year on December 4th. That'll be in Louisville if anyone would like to come. Are there folks that have attended the workshop before in the room? Got a couple of hands, one hand. I think you were at the workshop, yeah. You don't have to raise your hand, it's fine. But yeah, there's one more before the end of the year that's in December. But from all these workshops, I started to realize that there was a lot of folks that were kind of locked into more mundane data visualizations, such as just pie charts and bar graphs, because that's just what we're familiar with. And the reason why I call them mundane is because sometimes critical data can be well hidden behind the technical jargon that we continue to use, and it's not as accessible, and it doesn't always express the emotion that Dr. Owens was kind of talking about earlier when he opened us up. So I started creating some tools, such as this one. This one's called the Infographic Wheel. I got an award for it last year, which is really great. But this one is meant to suggest infographic layouts based on the characteristics of your data. It's a handheld tool that's about 10 by 10. I do not sell these anymore. I do not, mainly because it's evolving. This is the 50, so this version has 36 potential layouts. This one has 50 potential layouts. My catalog that I created has 173 different potential layouts, so it's growing, and it needs to be in a digital form because the printed one is not enough. So that's why I don't sell the other one anymore. But I do still use it in some of my teaching activities or just in conversation with other user designers. Since this is a collaboration that I did with a colleague out of California who used some of my layouts in some experiments with her students. And I definitely like to continue to use them in different play methodologies because I truly believe that more people need to have these skills. And so trying to find the easiest way to digest them is a big part of my work that I do today. Thank you so much for your time.